Now, all time, Ricky Williams holds the top
Powered
two
by
spots.
Riverside FM.
In 2002, Ricky Williams had 1,853 yards, and in 2003, he had 1,372. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I am Ernie Jennings, your host, and I'm going to continue reviewing the past seasons for every team in the NFL. We started with the Buffalo Bills because I started with the AFC East, and I figured I'd just work my way through the AFC, then move over to the NFC, and we go division by division, and I would do it by what place the teams came in each division. So Buffalo Bills came in first place in 2024 in their division, and the Miami Dolphins came in second. So we're going to continue on with the Miami Dolphins in this look at each individual team in the NFL. So the Miami Dolphins finished 2024 at 8 wins, 9 losses. They were 5-3 at home, 3-6 on the road, and 3-3 in their own division. How does this team as a whole compare to past Dolphins teams? And how do the players from the 2024 team stand up against the greatest Dolphins players of all time? That's what we're going to look at right now on this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So let's start with the coaches. And as far as this goes, this doesn't take much time because there's not anything to really talk about. There's one coach for the Miami Dolphins that stands head and shoulders above the rest of them. It's not even close. Don Shula from 1970 to 1995 led the Miami Dolphins to 257 wins. The next in line is Dave Wannstedt from 2000 to 2004. He had 42 wins. That's it. The current coach, Mike McDaniel, from 2022 to 2024, has 28 wins. It's a long way to go for anybody. I'm not sure, unless Mike McDaniel can turn things around, I'm not sure even how long he'll last. A couple years, he could be number 2 if he's still with the team. But to catch Don Shula, I doubt it seriously. Though he's not that old, so it's a possibility if he was to stay with Miami for that long. But that'd be incredible. You just don't see that kind of longevity anymore in coaching. Not for one team, anyway. All right. Let's look at the passing leaders for the Miami Dolphins. And obviously, again, there's a clear leader here, which is Dan Marino. He leads the Miami Dolphins with 61,361 yards. That's not even close either. You got a lot of good quarterbacks. Bob Greasy, 1967 to 1980, he had 25,092. And then Ryan Tannehill from 2012 to 2018 had 20,434. So there's your top 3. Tua is number 4 with 15,506. He'd need almost 5,000 yards. I don't see that. He has had some big seasons, but 5,000 yards, it's not impossible. It's been done before several times by different quarterbacks. But he could catch Ryan Tannehill if he passes for 5,000 yards. Other than that, it's a ways to go before Bob Greasy, a couple, 2-3 years for that, and years to go for Dan Marino. That's a record I'm not sure that any of these current quarterbacks, well, Tua being the main guy, is going to be able to reach. But we'll see. NFL is a pass-happy league, and we'll see what he does. But he'll have to stay with this team, and that's up in the air after this year. We'll see how that goes even. So that's the lead. Dan Marino holds that by a mile. Let's look at TDs. And again, it's Dan Marino with 420. Bob Greasy has 192. Ryan Tannehill with 123, and Tua with 100. Now, it is very possible that Tua catches Ryan Tannehill. He only needs 23 this year. If he can stay healthy, he could easily catch Ryan Tannehill. 23 is not that many for him to have in a season. So we'll see. That would move him into third. And then, of course, it's a long way to catch Bob Greasy for second. Now, when it comes to interceptions, again, Dan Marino has 252. Bob Greasy has 172. And this is how you tell early era to the later era. Bob Greasy is second with 172, and then Ryan Tannehill is third with 75. And I won't harp on it anymore, but if you listen to previous podcasts, you'll know why there's such a stark difference between the early seasons of the NFL and the later seasons as far as interceptions go. Tua is fifth with 44, and he doesn't throw interceptions at a high rate. Only 2.2% of his passes are intercepted. Dan Marino was at 3%, which actually is not bad for that time period. And Bob Greasy was at 5%. But again, that has to do with some rules that the league made over time from the past to current time. All right. So again, Dan Marino holds pretty much every record. And we'll look at one more here, sacks. Interestingly, with Dan Marino, with that quick fire arm of his, alleviated some of the sacks he might have received. But Dan Marino came in second in this category to Bob Greasy. Bob Greasy had 335 sacks. Dan Marino had 270. Ryan Tannehill had 248, and Tua again comes in fourth with 111. Quite a ways from even third place. He'd have to more than double his sack total. So it'll be a long time before he reaches that if he's still with Miami. It'll be years and years before he can reach that. So those are your passing leaders. Let's look at the rushing leaders for the Miami Dolphins. Now, this is some records that if Miami can keep a running back around for a while, these are records that could be broken. No one's way up there like in a lot of other teams. For example, Buffalo had 2 running backs with over 10,000 yards. But the leading rusher for the Miami Dolphins is Larry Csonka from 1968 to 1979. He had 6,737 yards. And then you had Ricky Williams from 2002 to 2010 with 6,436. They're the 2 leaders. They're the only 2 over 6,000 yards. Ronnie Brown's third with 4,815. So that's really not that many. If some of these players could stay with the team, they have a chance to break that record. Raheem Mostert was on the team. He was 12th with 2,181. And moving down the list, now Devon Achane, or Achane, however you say his name, I'm not sure, has 1,707 yards. So he's a guy, if he stays with his team over the next several years, he'll easily move up this list. And if he could stay for a second contract, he could pass Larry Csonka at some time down the road. But this is a stat that's going to be a long time before somebody breaks it, even though it's not that far away compared to other teams. Still, it's going to be a while. As far as TD goes, it's Larry Csonka. Again, is rushing TDs with 53. Ricky Williams had 48. And then it's a big drop after that. And again, Mostert, when he was on the team, had 23. But current players, Achane, again, has 14. Not bad start. And again, this is a record that I think he could catch if he can stay with the team long enough to do it. So those are your rushing leaders. Let's move to the receiving leaders. Again, not that bad of record to try to beat. Mark Duper from 1982 to 1992 had 8,869 with Mark Clayton right with him. just about, he played from 1983 to 1992 for the Miami Dolphins. He had 8,643. They're the top two. Now, these are some of the records that could be broken. Tyreek Hill is number 8 with 4,468. If he could get back on track, have a 1,000-yard season, he'd move up to 5th at least. 1,200 yards, he'd move up to 4th. But after that, it's going to be a while. And he's, not that he's old, but he is over 30. So we'll see how much farther he can move his way up this list. Jalen Waddle, who is younger, is 10th with 4,129. So he's really not that far behind, a little over 300 yards behind Tyreek Hill. So the two of them we'll be watching this season and see how they move up this list. They should be able to move up a few players as long as they stay healthy. So that'll be fun to watch. When we're looking at receptions, Mark Clayton had 550 and Mark Duper had 511. Just beating out Nat Moore, who played from 1974 to 1986. He had 510 receptions. Those are the leaders. Now, Tyreek Hill again and Jalen Waddle are 10th and 11th. Tyreek Hill has 319 receptions and Jalen Waddle has 309 receptions. So again, this is an area where they can definitely move up the list. And the reason is, as far as yards, they're farther back, but that's because Mark Clayton averaged 15.7 yards a reception, and Mark Duper averaged 17.4 reception per reception. Whereas, as much as you picture Tyreek Hill running down the field, he averaged 14 yards a reception so far for Miami, while Jalen Waddle's averaged 13.4. So they're not averaging as many yards per reception, which is why they have a better chance to catch the reception record than the yardage record. Now, those are wide receivers. Tony Nathan, who played from 1979 to 1987, is the leading running back as far as receiving goes. He has 383 receptions, and he has 3,592 yards in receptions, which is also the most as far as a running back goes. When looking at the current running backs, Devon Achane again has 105 receptions. So he's a ways away from Tony Nathan's 383. He's got a long time to go to catch him as far as receptions by a running back. Now, as far as tight end, the leading tight end, it was Mike Gesicki, who had 231, and he played from 2018 to 2022 for Miami. And when we're looking at tight ends again, as I said, Durham Smythe has 132 receptions, so he's a ways away as well, but a lot closer to the lead for that than the running back situation. But I don't know how he's going to do as far as tight ends go for Miami. But we'll see. And because you got Jonnu Smith on the team, and we'll see what happens with him. I don't know. There's been talk of trade and so forth, so I just really don't know what's going to happen in that situation. But we'll keep an eye on it during the season. Now, when it comes to TDs, Mark Clayton had 81 TDs. Nat Moore was second with 74. This is where Clayton and Duper separate a little bit, with Clayton with 81 and Duper had 59. Those are the leaders in touchdown receptions. Bruce Hardy from 1978 to 1989 had 25 touchdowns as a tight end. He's a leading tight end. Now, as far as wide receivers go, Tyreek Hill is number 7. He has 26 touchdowns. So he has a chance to move up a couple spots, no more than 2. I would say Paul Warfield's 5th with 33. He could catch him. That's only 7 touchdowns. But Chris Chambers is 4th with 43, and I don't see Tyreek Hill getting 17 touchdowns. I mean, I know Chase did it this year, but I don't see Tyreek Hill doing that. So that's your leaders as far as touchdowns go in receptions. All right, let's shift over to the defense. See a couple defensive positions. When it comes to interceptions, as I said, you're going to see players from the past more than likely. Now, there is one exception here with Xavier Howard, who played with the Miami Dolphins from 2016 to 2023. He's number 5 on the list of interceptions with 29. The leader's Jake Scott, who played from 1970 to 1975 for the Miami Dolphins. He had 35. Dick Anderson played from 1968 to 1977. He had 34. So 29 by Xavier Howard's pretty good for somebody that's current time period. It's very difficult. But 35 is not a number that can't be caught. But it's going to take somebody else other than obviously anybody that's currently playing. Because I'm looking down the list of their players, and the first one I see is Nick Needham, 2019 to 2024, has 6 interceptions. So a long time before anybody gets even close to the top 10, let alone Jake Scott with his 35. All right. Let's look at one more career stat, and that's tackles for loss. Jason Taylor had 137 tackles for loss from 1997 to 2011, which is by far the most for the Miami Dolphins. In fact, he's the only one over 100. Cameron Wake from 2009 to 2018 had 97. So those are the top 2. Now, Zach Sealer, 2019 to 2024, has 49. So he has a chance to move up this list. And this is, unlike interceptions, you're going to see current players all through the top. Even Jason Taylor at 137, somebody's going to catch him at some point. So we'll keep an eye on that, especially Zach Sealer with his 49. It'd be hard, actually, this year to catch anybody. He's probably not going to get 21. If he got 21, that'd be an incredible season. As far as tackles for loss in a single season. If he had 21, he'd catch Zach Thomas, who has 70. And that he's in 3rd place. So those are your defensive players. All right, let's look at the single season offensive leaders, starting with the quarterbacks. Tua had 2,867 yards, but he only played 11 games. So that kind of explains why he had so few yards. Dan Marino holds so many of the top spots. In the top 20, he holds 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12 of the top 20 spots for the Miami Dolphins. So he holds the top 2 spots. In 1984, he had 5,084 yards. The only time the Miami Dolphins went over 5,000 yards in a season. Did that in 16 games. Tua was 3rd, though. In 2023, he had 4,627 yards, just behind Dan Marino, who in 86 had 4,746. So those are the top 3. Now, when you look at the quarterbacks this past season, obviously Tua just didn't play enough to rack up anywhere on the list. In fact, he finished 21st as far as yardage goes. Joe Burrow had 4,918 yards last year. So he led the league in yardage. All right. When we look at touchdown passes in a single season, again, and this is by a long shot, Dan Marino holds 5 of the top 6 spots. He had in 1984, he had 48 touchdown passes. And in 1986, he had 44. Those are the top 2 by a long ways. He has the number 3 spot in 1994, which is 10 years after he set his career high. He had 30 touchdown passes. He did that twice. Tua comes in at 5th. In 2023, he had 29 touchdown passes. That's the most he's had. This past year, he only had 19 touchdown passes. But again, 11 games, so kind of right on the pace he normally has. Now, when you're looking at the rest of the NFL in 2024, Joe Burrow again, 43 touchdown passes. Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson each had 41 touchdown passes. They led the league. Tua, he did finish 19th with 19 touchdown passes. Now we'll move to a category that's on the other end of something good, and that's interceptions thrown. Now, Dan Marino, again, unfortunately for him, leads in interceptions, but not like some other quarterbacks in that time period in the 80s. Dan Marino had 23 interceptions twice, once in 1986 and again in 1988. That leads the Miami Dolphins for the most interceptions. He has the top 4 spots as far as that goes. But that's really not bad compared to some of the other quarterbacks back then. Tua is pretty good with the ball as far as interceptions goes. He had a year where in 2023, he's 23rd on the list. He only had 14 interceptions, though, which is not bad at all. 14 interceptions. He threw them at a 2.5% rate, whereas Dan Marino was throwing his 23 interceptions at a 3.7% rate. So pretty good. Not the best, but still not bad. This last year, Tua threw 7 interceptions in a shortened season for him. Now, when we look at the rest of the NFL in 2024, Baker Mayfield and Kirk Cousins each had 16 interceptions. Geno Smith had 15. So with only 7, Tua finished in 25th as far as interceptions go. Now, obviously, he'd have had more than that probably if he'd have played the entire season. But still, I doubt seriously he would have got to 16, maybe 10, 11 or something like that. So he's right in the middle of the pack as far as interceptions go. And then let's see how sacks go. And this is a problem for Tua. He cannot be sacked. He gets hurt too easy. Ryan Tannehill holds the top 3 spots as far as being sacked. He has 58 sacks. That's the highest amount, and he did that in 2013. The next year, in 2014, he had 46 sacks. And then the year after that, he had 45 sacks. So he got sacked quite often. Whereas Tua, the most he's had is 29 sacks, which isn't too bad. And that was in 2023. But still, he can't afford to be sacked. Now, in the NFL, speaking of being sacked too much, Caleb Williams had 68 sacks. He was sacked 68 times. C.J. Stroud was sacked 52 times. The Chicago Bears need to protect Caleb Williams this coming year. He cannot be taking 68 sacks a year. He won't be playing too many years at that rate. And same for C.J. Stroud with the Houston Texans. They need to beef up that offensive line to help out C.J. Stroud some. Geno Smith now, he was sacked 50 times playing for Seattle. Now he's moved to the Raiders, so we'll see how that goes for him. So those are the passing leaders in different categories. So let's look at the rushing totals by the Miami Dolphins. So Devon Achane had 907 yards rushing last year. That led the Miami Dolphins. Now, all time, Ricky Williams holds the top 2 spots. In 2002, Ricky Williams had 1,853 yards. And in 2003, he had 1,372. So these are records that a running back currently playing could catch. Now, the 1,853 yards would be difficult, but 1,372, That's not unreasonable to find a good running back who could catch that type of a record. So we'll see. Devon had 907, like I said, but that's the best he's had, so he's a long ways. He hasn't even made it to 1,000. 15 Miami Dolphins have made it to at least 1,000 yards rushing. Now, when you look at the running backs last season, Saquon Barkley had 2,005 yards. He led the NFL, so quite a ways from any Miami Dolphin. With 907 yards, Devon finished in 21st position as far as that goes. Not a bad average, 4.5 yards per carry, but still only 907 yards. But he only had 203 carries, quite a few less than Saquon Barkley. Not the workhorse, not the build for that type of a amount of carries anyway. So let's look at the touchdowns. Devon had 6 last year, by far the most. What a crazy time for Raheem. Started or played in 13 games, only had 2 touchdowns. But in 2023, he had 18, which is the Miami Dolphins record. 18 is his, which he holds, and he did it in 2023. Beat out Ricky Williams, who in 2002 had 16 touchdowns rushing. Those are the top 2. So really nobody currently. We'll see how Devon does without Raheem there. But I don't see him getting 18. That's a lot, honestly. And in fact, this year, nobody did that. You had 3 players who did have 16. Derrick Henry for Baltimore, Jamar Gibbs for Detroit, and James Cook for Buffalo. They each had 16, with Josh Jacobs for Green Bay having 15. That was the leaders last year. So 6 is quite a ways down the list at number tied for 24th as far as that goes. So those are your rushing leaders. Let's look at receiving now and see who did the best in that category for Miami. We'll start with receptions. So the tight end, Jonnu Smith, had 88 receptions. Tyreek Hill had 81 receptions. Quite a drop-off for him. Big drop-off, really. Those were the top 2 as far as receiving goes. Devon had 78. Jalen Waddle had 58. So it's pretty interesting. You have a tight end, wide receiver, and running back, the top 3. And then a couple of wide receivers again. But not your typical division of the ball as far as passing goes, but very interesting to see 3 players basically with very similar reception totals. The Miami Dolphins, as a all-time, Tyreek Hill has the top 2 spots with 119 receptions. He did it 2 years in a row, 2022 and 2023. 119, so big drop-off for him from 2023 to 2024. Jarvis Landry has the next 2 with 112 and 110, and Jalen Waddle comes in as the other player with over 100 receptions with 104. Those are the top 5, the only ones with 100 or more receptions. As far as tight ends go, Jonnu Smith holds that record with 88 that he had last year. That's the most receptions in a single season by a tight end for the Miami Dolphins. And then as far as running backs, Devon has that record also last year with 78. So that's impressive. So you could see those 2 move up the leaderboard as far as career goes in their respective category of tight end and running back. And that's if Jonnu Smith is still on the team. We'll see what happens with him going into 2025. Now, when you compare those stats against the wide receivers in the rest of the NFL, Jamar Chase had 127 receptions, 8 more than Tyreek Hill had at his greatest point. Amon Ray St. Brown had 115. And then you had a couple of tight ends. Brock Bowers for the Raiders had 112. Trey McBride for Arizona had 111. Those are your top four. And then when you're looking at Jonnu Smith with his 88, that put him at number 15. Not too bad. Tyreek Hill was number 21 with his 81. And then Devon was 24th with 78. So kind of a well-rounded way of throwing the ball in Miami. When we look at total yards, then we have a little bit of a shakeup with Tyreek Hill moving up into the top spot with 959 yards. Jonnu Smith had 884, and Jalen Waddle had 744. So those are your top three as far as yards go. When you're looking at Miami Dolphins all time, Tyreek Hill again holds the top two spots with 1,799 in 2023, and then in 2022 he had 1,710. The big difference for him, not only in fewer receptions, but last year he only averaged 11.8 yards per reception versus those 2 years when he had 15.1 and 14.4 yards per reception. Huge difference. And he holds the all-time record by quite a distance over Mark Clayton, who in 1984 had 1,389. So Mark Clayton did hold the record for a long time, 38 years. Long time. Jalen Waddle in 2022 did have 1,356 on only 75 receptions. That's because he was averaging 18.1 yards a reception. That's impressive. That's 3 yards more than Tyreek Hill. And you just kind of, at least I do, picture it differently as far as the way I see Tyreek Hill moving down the field. But in the end, it's Jalen Waddle who averages more yards per reception. Interesting. Now, when you look at the players from 2024 and the rest of the NFL, Jamar Chase again, 1,708 yards. Big lead over Justin Jefferson, who had 1,533. So very impressive. There was quite a few. 24 players had over 1,000 yards receiving. And so Tyreek Hill, with his 959, ended up 30th as far as that goes. Jonnu Smith ended up 34th. So those are the top two. But way down the list as far as when you look at the entire NFL of last year. All right. One more category. We'll look at TDs. How did they do in TDs? And this is again puts Jonnu Smith back up there with 8 touchdown receptions. Tyreek Hill at 6. And again, we have this mix-up with Devon having 6 as well. So tight end, wide receiver, running back, all catching touchdown passes. Then it's a drop to Jalen Waddle with only 2. Not too many last year. Mark Clayton holds the top 2 spots for touchdown receptions. He had 18 in 1984, 14 in 1988. Tyreek Hill in 2023 did have 13 touchdown receptions. That's the most by a current player. So those are your Miami Dolphins. Now, when you compare them to the 2024 receivers, again, Jamar Chase, who had the Triple Crown for receiving, he had 17 touchdown receptions. Terry McLaurin had 13. So having 8 by Jonnu Smith actually isn't too bad. Tied him with George Kittle at number 13. So pretty good. So all right, that is our Miami Dolphins, a look at the stats from their team. Hope you enjoyed that. In our next podcast, we'll cover the third place team in the AFC, that being the New York Jets. And as I mentioned in the previous podcast on the Buffalo Bills, there are dozens of stats that I could have covered, but I just don't have the time. So It's just we just have to kind of pick and choose, which is what I do. But the good thing is that during the season, when I am covering the games each week in the NFL, I will mention any record that's broken or that's come close to being broken. So, and that goes for individual games. We didn't even look at that, the stats for single games records that might have been set last year or any time. But during the season, we will look at those as we look at the games during the season, the actual season. So, all right. I hope you enjoyed that. In our next podcast, like I said, we will cover the third place team in the AFC East, that being the New York Jets. Now, like I said, I didn't cover all the all-time leaders in single games, but don't worry about that. I will provide those stats during the season when I give in-season updates. Please subscribe. That helps grow the podcast, and add a 5-star rating if you would. I'd greatly appreciate that. And I thank you for listening, and I hope you listen to the next podcast when that comes, which won't be long. That's a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. Until next time, tschüss.